We're gonna get started now, and I'm recording, and I'm just gonna introduce myself. And I'm Søren Nielsen. I'm the artist behind Spine, and we also have Nate in here, who is the programmer. And I've listed some topics that we'll be going through. And to start up with, we're just gonna go through the general workflow in Spine, and this is mainly setup versus the animate mode. We're gonna go through the basics of setting up a skeleton and putting images on it. Then we're gonna go through using skins, and then we're gonna get started with animation. And by then, if we need a small break, we'll take a 10-minute break. Then after the break, we're gonna go into some more detailed animation using the graph and just tweaking the animation so it becomes more lifelike. Then quickly, we're gonna go through exporting data, and after that, jump into Photoshop for a bit and show us a quick workflow on how to, quickly cut out the different pieces to use in Spine. And after that, we're gonna have a more thorough question session, but you can also ask questions during. And after that, we'll be concluding it and take maybe a couple of minutes to just talk about what we've gone through. So if you have any questions before we start, now's the time. All right. Doesn't sound like there is anything. All right, so I'm just gonna get started. And as you can see, I have Spine open here already. And hopefully it should be following around the cursor so you can actually see what's going on. Okay, we have a question from Nate here. So it looks like he loaded his hand again. All right, so I'm just gonna get started, and I'll be building a small thing here, a small ninja character I've been working on. But before I do that, I'm just gonna go through the workflow. So when you open up Spine, you'll be in setup mode. And setup mode is basically where you create everything. Whereas animate mode is where you take what you've created in setup mode and start animating it. The cool thing about this is that if you change your setup pose in setup mode, it will propagate through to your animate mode. So if you move something in setup mode, it will also be moved in animate mode. But you'll see more of that when we get to that. So in the bottom we have all the major tools, and as I use them, I'll go through them in more detail. And on the right side we have the tree, and we have the filter buttons up here. For filtering the bones, the slots, the images, and then we have this button here, which will expand and scroll the tree to the editor selection as the tooltip says. So I'll just turn that on now and actually get started on creating this first character. And for those of you who've seen the quick overview video, it's pretty much the same thing, except here I'll be doing it a little slower, and again, you can ask questions while I'm doing it. So usually the first thing I do is I drag in a template. And I'm just going to find that here. So we have this, go save this thing up first, sorry. And there we go. And go to the images. And this is where you can find your images. Just going to browse it. And I know I already had it set it up to what I want. I'm just going to select this folder here. So
just briefly, the reason he saved his project is because the path that you specified for the images node, it shows the images under the path you specified. So at the bottom of the tree, you can see the path is empty. So it will show all images in whatever directory you save the project.
Yeah, you don't select images, single images. You don't go in and select a single image. You actually select the folder instead, and it will load all the images. And this means that it will also, if you save an image, if you update an image from your image editor, it will also update automatically in Spine. So, okay, but I'm just gonna get started on creating this first skeleton here. And usually I like to work with a template. So I've created this template of the ninja that I'll be setting up here. And there's two ways you can actually get the image in. And one way is to just drag it into the scene. Another one is to click set parent and then select the bone, or you can drag it up to the root as well. For this, I'll just be dragging it in so I get it at the position where I want it. So got the template in now. Just gonna zoom out so you can see the actual size and frame it so we get the entire thing. And with this in, it will now be placed under the root. And before I actually start creating the bones and everything, I'm just gonna select the slot here where the image is placed under, and I'll go through what slots are and how they can be used a bit later on. But for now, just going to select the slot and click this button down here to change the color. And the reason I do this is I want to be able to distinguish the images that I drag in from my template. So hit space to deselect, and I'm going to get started creating the bones. So first, disable selection of the image so I don't accidentally select it. Click the create button down here, and it already has the root selected. And I'll just get started with the first bone here. And I usually create the hip bone first. And the reason I do that is when you're animating, you don't actually do animation on the root bone. So if I wanted this guy to jump, I wouldn't be moving the root. I would actually be doing it on the hip to move that, to translate that out. Because you want to have like a point in space that is where you actually, so you always know where the root is. So with the hip bone selected, and it's now created on the root, I'm going to create the torso, and I just left click and drag. Now, because I have the hip bone selected, it will be created under that. Then with that created, I'm going to create the head, and then I have these two hair strands up here that I want to be separate. So I'm going to create two small bones for that, and select the bone here again. So now I have those two bones underneath. Then select the torso, create this hand here, right hand, select the torso again, create the left hand, then select the hip, and I'll create this foot here. I know mostly this is an idle pose, so mostly he will be running or walking or jumping or something like that. So mostly the foot will actually be pointing this way. So that's why I'm creating it like this. Once again, select the hip. Oops, let me do that. Select the hip and draw this out again. And last, I need to create this thing here for the belts and for the small hood ends here as well, so they have something to pivot around. So everything is just called bone 1, 2, 3, so on. So I'm just going to rename them, and the first one I'm going to rename is the hip. Just double click it, and torso. Just going to do this really quick, and then right foot, left foot, and the belts ends, the head, right hand, and left hand, and the hood ends. And I have the hair, so I'll call this one hair 1, this one hair 2, and I think I got all of them now actually. Let's check. Yeah, that looks right. So now I'm actually ready to already start dragging in the different images. So to do that, just go to the images that I already have expanded here, and I'll just first, I'll just select the torso image here, click Set Parent, or hit P, and select the bone that I want it to be added to. Then a dialog pops up here, and it will ask me the name of the slot that the image will place under. So I'm just going to hit OK because I don't want to change that. I'm going to enable selection of the images and disable selection of the bones. Hit V to go into translate mode and move it into place. I'm just going to do this pretty quickly for all the different bones. Oh, sorry, all the different images. And let's see. And if you have any questions while I'm doing it, just go ahead and ask.
Does the program come with any templates?
You mean image templates or skeleton templates?
Yeah. Well, like the stuff that you're using here, like this little ninja example, is any of that included so that we could sort of run through these tutorials ourselves?
The small ninja guy here isn't including the examples yet, but he will be. I'm doing some more animations with him, so there's going to be a little more to work with. But if you want the project after this workshop, we can definitely put it up somewhere for you so you can download it.
Yeah, that sounds good.
There are other examples. There's a dragon example. We have Spine Boy, a power up, and a UI Spinosaurus example, as well as a Goblin project that you can see. And they do have, I believe they all have the template image, which is the fully assembled character that you can use to do this exact thing that he's doing, if you wanted to create a project from scratch using those art assets.
Yeah. I noticed that some of the nodes that you've made, have the line coming out of it, which I figure is pivot point and the bone length. But the ones that you have on the hood end and on the hair don't have that?
You mean these up here? The ones that are
Yeah.
marked? Yeah, it's basically the length that decides how they look. And I can just quickly show you actually. So if I select this one here, and I can, since there's no length on it, I can't just drag it out. So I can change the length down here. And if I do that, let me just make it a little, whoop, that was a little too much. You can actually see that it is just
interesting.
so they are the exact same, but we just wanted them to not take up as much space, so we made these actually change how they look depending on the length.
So will you add length to those later when you animate it?
Not for these. These don't actually need length because this is just a pivot for the image to rotate around. Same with the head. They work just like bones. It's just a visual representation of them.
Okay.
Okay, so let's see, which one did I add that to? Here. Here one. Let's add it to. See, that's wrong. So I'm just gonna move this up here and rename this one. I just dragged it up. And gonna do the same with this because they're a little close to each other. So there we go. And then we have the hood ends here. Okay, so that actually makes it for all the different images. They've all been placed for now. There's going to be multiple ones down here at the feet before I add those. I just want to make sure that the draw order is okay. So Just going to minimize the skeleton here, or the root, and the images as well. Go into draw order. And here, everything, the hood ends are now drawn on top of everything. So I want them to be drawn behind the head. So I'm going to drag the head up here. But I also want the hair strands to be drawn in front of the head. So I take the first this one, then this one, and now they're drawn on top. I'm just going to hide the bones for now. And then we have, oh, here we go. Yeah, you had a question?
Yeah, this may be skipping ahead a bit, but can you change that draw order on a frame-by-frame basis in an animation?
Not currently, but it's something where that was a part of one of our stretch goals, so it will be added. So you can actually animate
Oh,
it.
wonderful. Great.
Okay, so we want the right hand to be in front of the torso as well, which it is actually. We want the left hand to be behind the torso. Don't need the template to show anymore, so I'm just going to hide this. You can see the visibility out here, so I'm just hitting the template. And let's see, the right foot in front of the torso. Belt end should be behind the right foot, so I'm going to move that down here. Let's see, right hand in front of the belt ends. It takes a little tweaking to get it right. There might be some of them I've missed, but you can always go back to the setup pose and change it. So with the draw order set up, like I have now, actually this one looks wrong. So let me just fix that one. We have the left foot that needs to go behind belt ends. There we go. So now it looks right. The reason I did this now is because I'm going to be adding more images to the same slot, and because I have 3 images more per foot that I want to add. But I add them to the same slot, which means they'll be getting the same draw order, and I don't have to go in and set that again. So I'm just going to do that quickly. I'm going to find the enable selection of the bones again. So I have the right foot, and I have, as you can see, there's some more images here that I want to add. So I'm going to take this and set the parent to this one. And now, as you can see, there's already a slot there. So I can choose to use the existing slot or create a new one. I'm just going to use the existing one. And I'm going to do that for all of them. And then, let's see.
I have a technical question about the drawing order.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, basically, I've looked at the JSON file exported from one of the template projects. How is that determined in the file? Is it just the actual logical order of the files, of the different parts, that determines the drawing order, or is there another way to keep track of that?
There's in the JSON, in the binary, there's a slot section, and the order that the slots appear is the draw order for the bind pose.
Thank you.
I just went ahead and added.
I say bind pose. Sorry.
Yeah, I just went ahead and added the other images to the right foot here. But this time I just dragged them up to the bone. I'm just going to do the same for the left foot. So
This would be a good time to use filters, so you don't have to drag so far.
oh, was there another question? It popped up and disappeared. It doesn't look like it. All right, so I have all them added now. Oh, another question. Let me get that first.
Yes. What's the difference between the red and green little icons in the images that you're using?
Yeah, that's a good one. The green one means they're in use. The red one means they're not used.
Ah, very nice.
So as you can see, I have some here from an older like this one. It's an older version that I just used to test out, or a rough sketch of the character that I did before I worked on anything else.
And in use just means on the stage or attached to some bone at some point?
Yeah, these I mean, the red ones are not attached to anything. The green ones are. That means they're used. If that was your question.
Yeah, I think so. And it's just for setup mode. It's like it's being used in setup.
It will be the same in animate mode. It will show as being used in animate mode as well. But thing is, in animate mode, you can't draw or drag. Sorry, you can't drag new images to the skeleton. So you want to do that instead.
Right. I'm wondering about like the ninja's foot, since that foot changes. If it would say that that front-facing foot is not in use if you're on a frame where it's not being used.
Oh, okay.
Or if
no, it
it's
will,
still attached to the bone.
it's still attached, yeah. So it will still say that it's being used.
Gotcha.
Okay. All right. So as you can see, it looks a bit weird now. So I need to tweak this. And the first thing I'm gonna do is change these to be the side and get them into the correct position. And I'll have to move this bone a bit as well. And I'm just gonna show you what compensate does. So instead of actually getting it into position on the bone, I'd rather move the image where I want it to, and then afterwards move the bone. So to do that, I will put on compensation, just image compensation here. Select this bone. Now I can move it without the image actually following. If I take this off, now it will follow. So, and this is the more to my liking, this position here. So with that put in, also gonna move this fellow just a little bit. Gonna need to set up the other images so they're in the right position, even if they're actually not gonna be visible on the setup codes here. So take this one here and move it into position. This takes a little bit of tweaking to get it into the right position. You can see that this needs to be moved a little to the left and then slightly down, and that's closer. And then the same for this. There we go. And I'll need to do the same for the other one. I'm just going to hide this foot meanwhile, so I can actually see what I'm doing here. So, like that position. We are actually making this a bit easier in the future to do this, so you don't have to sit and do that much aligning of it. There we go. All right, so that's set up now. I'm just gonna go ahead and actually save this out. So we have this as we want it.
Do you think now would be a good time to talk about slots and what they are and things like that?
Yeah. That's a good idea. So the slots are added. It's kind of a place that you store the images, and you can only have one image visible at a time per slot, but you can have as many slots as you want on a bone. So the reason why we have slots is because then you can define you define the draw order with the slots. So instead of doing it on the bones, let's say that you actually had the draw order defined on the bones, then and you have two images on the same bone, but you want one image to be in front of something and the other image behind something. If the bone was actually what was defining the draw order, then you couldn't do that. So the slots is what defines the draw order, and then you can have different draw order depending on the slots you have. So you can have as many slots, like I said, on a bone. For this project here, I only need to have one slot per bone. but I have multiple images. Is that detailed enough for you? Any questions about it? Right, guess not.
They got it in one go.
All right, then we can get started on doing some animation here. Let me just quickly see if I've forgotten anything here. Nope, I think we're good. So, well, actually, there's one thing I want to go through before I actually jump into animation. That this is the skins feature. And just like I just saved the project again. I'm going to open up the goblins, and if you've been working with it, you've already seen these. And the goblin example here has these two skins. It has the goblin girl that you can switch to, and it has the goblin. And then on the skeleton, I'm just going to expand one of them. Instead of having an image directly attached to a slot, I actually have what we call as an attachment, where you have the image. So the reason why we created this was so you can have an entire skeleton where you want to reuse that, but you want to be able to quickly swap out two other images for an entire character. One thing we have been talking about is actually expanding this feature so you can have multiple skins visible at the same time, so they'll be blending with each other. So you could do things like having different guns attached to a skin, and then you could have different helmets and so on, and you'd just be able to switch between them by clicking, changing between the skins down here. As you can see, I have animation on this. I'm just going to set it to playback. It might be a little slow on the video there, so I can just slow it down and do it manually. As you can see, there's animation here, and I can switch to the goblin, and it's using the exact same animation. There's no tweaking done to these animations at all. I'm just gonna quickly show you how you. So,
if I could say something real quick. So you could have two characters, and they could have all different images by just using slots. You wouldn't need to use skins, and it could work exactly the same at runtime in your game. You could change all of the images that were attached to be the goblin girl images, and it would work just like this example does. But the real power of the skins is that if you're animating and you change what images are shown, then you'll have a problem if you're only using slots. For example, if you had the goblin blinking halfway through this walk animation, you need to show different eyes. And so for the green goblin, you need to show the green eyes, and for the goblin girl, you would need to show her eyes. If you want to reuse the animation, you can't have that image change be specific for the type, the character that you're showing. And by using the skin attachments, you hide and show the skin attachments. You don't hide and show the actual images. And that way, when you change the skin, which images are used for the eyes come from the skin and not from the animation. And that allows you to reuse all your animations without that problem. So the skins are really for reusing animations with the same skeleton, but they're not really for just changing out images. So if you had another weapon, instead of a spear, you had a little dagger or a sword, you would just put those in a slot. And then in your game, you would switch which image is shown. You wouldn't want to use a whole skin for that, because it's not really designed. You don't need the power of a skin just to change a weapon. And also, you can only have one skin active at a time. So if you're using skins to change what images are shown, instead of just showing them on the attachment, you will run into a problem where you want to have a different image shown on a different part of the character, and you're using a skin to change the sword. So you should definitely use slots if you have just simple image changes, and use the skins where you want to reuse whole animations for the same skeleton. Okay.
Thank you. If you have any questions about that, just shoot. We'll go through them. It can be the skins feature can be a bit difficult to grasp, and explaining it is, well, even worse, I think. So, but I'll show you how you actually set them up. So I'm just gonna do that now. I'm just gonna create a new project and do that. But I'll use the goblin images for this. So I'm just gonna find this here, and we're just gonna use the root bone. So the first thing you do is you create a new skin, and you just select the skins node here. Create a new skin. And we're gonna call this one goblin, and then another skin. Call this one for goblin girl, and then whatever you have active is actually what the images or the skins that you place will be placed on. So I'm going to start off with the goblin active, and I will go to the root here, create a new slot, then a new skin attachment. I'm just going to call this one head, and now have this here, and find the head here and drag it up. So now I have this this goblin here, but if I go to the skins and actually set the goblin girl to invisible, nothing will be shown. So I need to, but as
you might want to collapse. If you collapse the images, then you can see that it actually takes the image out of the tree when you change skins.
There we go. So as you can see, the attachment is still there. There's just no image under it. So expand this again, drag the head up, and now I have this in here, so I can switch between these two. And then you can, I mean, in this case, it's almost like just using a slot because there's no direct keying going on. But if I wanted to do this just without just with a slot, like Nate said, I would actually have to go in and key it for the different animations. And that means I would be in trouble if I actually have an animation where I wanted to change out the different images. I would actually have to go and duplicate that animation and rekey everything that has to do with what images are attached. So that's why we have the skins feature.
I think this is a good time. You can see that the path to the image under the head in the tree is cut off. So this would be a good time to show that you can make the tree bigger by dragging the.
You can rescale up here. So, all right, I'm gonna get back to the spine boy. Unless you have any questions about not spine boy, Speedy, or the ninja character. Unless you have any questions about the skin too.
I'm guessing I'm skipping ahead a bit there, but I'm guessing you're going to cover animation and having one animation on two different animations. Let me rephrase that. On one specific slot, if you put a skin attachment, are you saying that you could have one animation, a different animation per skin on one skin attachment?
You can have 10 skins on one animation if you wanted to.
That's a little confusing. You can have as many skins as you want on the same skeleton. What a skin does is it allows you to specify, for example, in this skeleton, he has a skin attachment called head. The actual image that's being shown comes from the skin. So in your animations, you can hide and show the head as if it were an image, even though the actual image comes from the skin. And so that's what skins are doing for you. They're an abstraction over what actual image is shown.
Yeah, I guess I can show you how it would look if I weren't using skins and what I would actually have to do. We're gonna have to step quickly into animation for this. but I'll just quickly show you how that will work. So it's gonna hide this and create a new bone.
Well, maybe I wasn't clear, or it's a bit confusing, but still it's pretty straightforward. I was looking at the dragon example,
Yeah.
where you have the wings that are animating, basically,
Mhm.
changing frames.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you make a second skin for the same dragon, uh, you could have a different set of images in your second skin for the
Yes.
wing animation.
Yes, you could.
Yes.
Because
Okay.
That's actually a good use case for a skin,
yeah.
is because you have the wings changing, and instead of showing in your animation, instead of showing the red wing at different positions, you would show the skin attachments at different positions, and then when you apply a skin, the skin attachments would show the appropriate images for like a red dragon or a blue dragon.
Okay, perfect. It's super clear now. Thanks.
All right, cool. Well, in that case, I'll open up the Speedy project here again and actually get started on the animation. So click up here in the top left corner, and we're now in animate mode. Let me just minimize this a little more. And down here you have timeline, which is popped up. You have the playback buttons, looping. We have the dope sheet that we can open, which is massive at this screen resolution, so I'm just going to minimize it a bit. So one thing I've noticed in my original graphics is the fact that the feet are a little too close to his torso. So before I do that, I'm just going to move this up. And I go back to setup mode to do that. I'm just going to move the torso up. And then back to animate mode here. Usually when I start doing animation, I think about what kind of movement I want. And in this animation, I'm just going to do a quick run cycle because they're relatively fast and they show a lot of weight. And basically, when you're thinking about animation, weight is you don't think about so much motion. Like if you're sitting thinking how to animate a specific thing, you think more about weight, really. I mean, you have the motion in there, but you think about how the weight makes everything interact with each other. And um, I'll show you some examples of some animations that are actually really stiff. Actually, I can do that now. Have a small video because I'm just going to share that. And now I'm sharing a video instead, and I'm just going to play this back, and you can see in this animation I have two animations, and there's one that only has linear peeing, and it has no squash and stretch in it, so it looks really stiff. I'm just going to play it back now so you can see. So as you can see, it looks pretty stiff, and now I switch to the one that has much more sense of weight in it. There's squash and stretch going on, and also the way that he comes up to the top with the torso, and it takes him a little longer to actually fall down from the gravity. So I'm just going to play it back once more so you can see it. So again, linear. And then much more weight added to it. Looks like he actually has weight. Right. So I'm going to share my screen again here. And you should see the screen share again now. Okay, so usually I'm going to be creating this animation from scratch. Usually I start with the first pose here, and we have one animation here already created. I'm just going to rename that to run. And then I'm just going to start posing everything. So as you can see, I'm just going to be moving these really quick. Just if you have any questions about what I'm doing, just just ask, because animation, it usually takes quite a lot of time to get it completely right.
So he's switching here between the translate tool and the rotate tool. And there's a shortcut for that. You can press the hotkeys, or you can also press right click. Right click will toggle between the current tool and the last tool that you had selected. So you can use that to easily switch between two tools, which saves you from having to click on the toolbar a lot.
Yeah, one thing I noticed here instantly was that the hood ends are actually in front of the right arm. I don't want that, but before I change that, I'm just gonna key everything. And I'm just gonna hit K. And now I've keyed all the changes that I've made. So I'm just gonna go back to setup mode. The reason I keyed it before I go is if I go into setup mode now and then come back, all the changes that I've done, they will actually be lost because it doesn't save or store the changes that you've made before you've actually keyed it. So I'm going to go back into setup mode here, find the draw order, and I want the hood ends to be behind the right hand, and then back into animate mode, and that looks correct. So just gonna keep doing this for a bit, get the right pose here. Then usually what I do in the first frame is I select all the bones except for the root, and then I key them again. So the reason I do this is because if I have, I'm just going to show instead, let's say the torso here, that I've done some changes to that, and I move it, it won't actually show any interpolation between this. It doesn't interpolate between the setup pose that you have. You actually need to key it on the first frame. So usually I just create some keys on the first frame, just so I know that the interpolation will be there. So I'm just going to get back to this.
So, a couple of things. If you drag the dope sheet button, you can resize the dope sheet, which is very useful.
Yeah, like this.
Yep.
Yes.
And also, he mentioned not to key the root bone, and that's pretty important because you're going to want to set the root bone position at runtime so that you can position your guy where you want him. If you key the root bone, when you play your animation, if you key translation, it will set the root bone position, the animation low, and that will be confusing for you why your animation doesn't show in the right place.
All right, so I have the pose I want for the first frame here, and then I know I wanted looping, and for this animation I'm just gonna go for something like 24 frames. So I'm just deselect everything here, collapse the tree, and select all the keys, go to frame 24 and paste them in. And you have the copy, cut, delete, and paste buttons here. Now, well, there's no animation going on because I've just taken the first frame and pasted it out onto the 24th frame. So I'm just going to go to frame 12, which is halfway through the animation. And then I'm going to do the where the right foot is in front instead of the left foot. Oh, sorry, the left foot is in front, not the right foot. Put those into place here. Hit K to key it. And now I have, you can see they're actually moving. It doesn't look exactly great yet, but I'll get to that in just a bit. So on the keyboard here, I'm pressing the W and S key to jump between these two, so I can quickly see if they are at the right spot. You can see just needs a little bit of tweaking. It's not huge, but
is there a place where all those shortcuts are listed?
No, there currently isn't. They're sort of a secret.
Oh.
We did post it on the forums, but we do need to write documentation for the show.
All right.
they will be added to the dock. So now that I've done
The shortcuts are shown in the tooltips.
yeah,
Sorry, the shortcuts are shown in the tooltips if you mouse over the buttons and wait long enough.
so they'll pop up here. If you hit F1, they will pop up instantly. So now that I've done changes, to the first frame, I did tweak the foot slightly. I need to make sure that it actually looks the same on the last frame. So I'm just going to paste that in, and now I have this. So I'm going to switch to step mode here. Step mode is basically what happens when I have this active. Is there's going to be no interpolation between the different keys. So as you can see, nothing is happening. It's not moving the legs. It still has data there, but with step mode active, you can't see it. And I like to work this way, simply because then I can imagine how things would look instead of actually trying to figure it out while I'm actually doing the animation, which I find a lot harder. So I'm going to get started on the next piece, and now we want this guy to be at like 1/3 of the time it takes him to get from 0 to 12, so at the 4th frame here. We want to do a pose for that, and as you can see, I still have step mode on. We need to move the torso up because now his legs would be longer. Also raise it a little more. And do the same for the head. And then get this a little closer. And then on the 8th frame, we want to get this where he's starting to set off. So something like this. And this one here. This might actually be a little too far, but I'm just going to keep it for now. And then I also need to raise the torso even more and rotate it. Do the same for the head. That was maybe a little too much. Just like that. But this foot, this is why I had multiple images. So I want this foot to start bending now. So I'm just gonna go here to the tree, expand the slot of the right foot, and select this image here, set that visible, and then you have this key dot up here that is orange. It means there's a change now. And if I click that, it turns red, and in here in the dope sheet, you can now see a key has been set. Now, because I didn't set a key on the first frame, it will be using that. So I'm just gonna actually set that on that. Well, actually, it is using that, but there we go. Okay, and then make sure that this fits. Key that, and now it looks a little better. Maybe a little too lean back, so tweak this a little and raise this slightly.
That last key that you set on the wrong keyframe.
So just select them and drag them over to move into another frame. Okay, so now as you can see, this frame 12, no longer looks like the first frame with the torso. So I'm just going to select that for both the torso and the head, expand it here, and copy the keys I have on the first frame to frame 12.
So something worth mentioning probably is that the dope sheet shows the keys for the selected bones. If you have no bones selected, it shows all of the bones. And as soon as you select a bone, you only see the keys for those bones. And there's a way to stop that from happening. If you click the little lock icon, then it will not show the selected bones. It will keep whatever bones it currently has. And there's a refresh button that updates.
Yeah, so like if you
Stoke.
the torso and the foot, and click the lock button here, then if I deselect everything, it won't change. And if I select this foot here, still no update. So I can click this refresh button to actually make it update. So it's locking your selection. All right.
Quick question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Are there any plans for like an auto key feature? So, a key gets added just by making a change to one of the bones at, position on the timeline?
Yeah, there are some plans for that. I would say it's a bit dangerous to use because you sometimes end up with a lot more keys than you actually want. So use it with keys.
Yeah, I figured just with the repetitive actions, it could speed things up a bit.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, if you're careful with auto keying and you use undo to undo changes that you don't actually want, and you remember that auto keying is on, it can be useful. The problem is that you're going to at some point open an animation and forget, and you're going to screw up your animation. And by the time you realize that you've done it, you might have made a lot of changes to it, added a lot of keys that you didn't mean to add.
Okay, so now I need to do the other side. So I'm going to be pretty much copying what I just did, just for the other feet. So I'm just going to do this relatively quick. Put this somewhere out there. This on here.
I guess I can ramble while he's doing this. So you see the buttons in the main toolbar, they change to orange after he's made a change. And then when he presses K to key them, they turn red to indicate that there's a key at the current frame.
Yeah, and what I just did before was I took all the keys I had for the torso and the head. Just for the torso. I took the keys I had for the first half of the animation and I copied them to the second half. I'm going to do the same for the head now. Just mark them and paste them in. So now I have an animation that will start to hold up when you're actually looping. I still need to do the feet here. And just like the other one, go in here and set it to this one. Key it.
If you notice in the tree, when the bone has been edited, when the bone has been changed and not keyed yet, a little dot appears for that bone. And then when he presses K, it keys everything that's changed, so those dots disappear. So you can look at the tree to see if you've changed bones that are not keyed yet. You can also click the dot in the tree to set a key for everything that's changed for that bone, both scale, rotate, and transition.
I just took step mode off now, because now I have sort of the extreme poses I want. There's definitely some tweaking that needs to be done here, so I'm just going to get started on that. Here, the foot is already protruding through the floor, so I'm going to move this key slightly and rotate it a little more. Key that. No, I'm not going to key that. Just going to change the image for now. And then here, change it to the one I had before. Key it, and then rotate it. Because the rotation was happening a little too quick before. Then actually start changing back to the original foot. I want to move this up slightly, I think. There we go. When you're playing it back like I am now, really slow, it would look like it's popping the images, but once you're actually playing it back at the speed you want, you won't notice it at all, and it'll look smooth.
So if you notice, he for the most part would set keys for major poses and then go in between those keys and halfway in between or a third of the way in between and set more keys. So you slowly refine the poses for the whole animation, starting from nothing.
And here I'm just tweaking the positions of it.
It doesn't have to be perfect, really.
No. I'm just gonna tweak this, and I'm happy with this now. So now I can do the other foot. Just gonna set the wrong one. This one.
Do you need to do the whole animation?
No, I'm not gonna be doing the entire animation because I already have that.
Maybe we can just skip to it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Go ahead. You had a question?
Yeah, I know you've been asked this a few times about the freeform deformation stretch goal, but I was noticing with the foot how you have the multiple foot assets for bending the toes. Are there plans to add anything like deformations that you could have that single foot asset and actually bend that part of a single image instead of having, was it 4 images? I guess it's just 3 images for the bend.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead and answer that. I'll do this.
Yeah, you animate. So deformation would be great. It's a tricky thing to implement. It would make the runtimes more complicated. One of the trickiest parts is actually in the UI. Is what is a good way to manipulate the images so that you can do everything you want in a nice way and key it. And we have ideas for how we would do it. It's just that there's so many other features that are more core features that the app needs for more general usage. Deformation allows you, you wouldn't need two bent images and one normal image. You could just have one normal foot image, use deformation for the rest, and it would even be better because you wouldn't be doing an image change. It would actually be bending the foot, and it would use interpolation for that bending. So it wouldn't, the toe wouldn't snap. It would slowly bend, and it would look a lot better. But the feature's complicated, and I think it's more important to do the things that are core to Spine first, and then sometime later, because we have a lot of promises that we made in the Kickstarter to get through. But after all of those, then we'll see where we're at. And we'd love to do deformation. It's really useful for animation. And it would make Spine really valuable. But at this time, we're just not sure where we'll be in a few months after we get all the work done.
Yeah, that makes sense.
All right. Well, I think I think you get the idea of how to do animation, or how you can do animation. I mean, there's more ways you can do it. So I'm gonna switch to an animation that is a little more finished, and show you that. Unless you have any more questions about this topic right now. All right. So I have this one here. It's the final one. I have a couple of animations on that. So if I had continued what I was doing, I would have gotten something like this. And as you can see, the hair is moving now, and there's a lot more secondary animation on it. but it's still very stiff because everything is keyed. Everything is keyed linear. So, for example, here he reaches the top point with the torso, and then it just immediately starts moving down. Usually, if you throw a ball in the air, it reaches a point where it moves slow, and then it falls down again, and that's what you'd be using the graph for. To do that, I know that the motion is coming from the key on the first frame to the key on the 8th frame. So select this key here, open the graph, and then I set this to Bezier. And then what happens now is it moves slow in the start, and then it picks up speed, and then slow in the end, so it hangs a bit, and then because this is still linear, it falls immediately. So I want to do the same for this. Set this to the same. Now when it gets up here, it actually hangs and then falls down. So we get a lot more fluid motion going on here. I don't know how well it shows there, but there's a huge difference in how it displays. And one thing you can do here is, let's say you wanted to have all these keys have the same. If you select multiple keys, don't need to select the last one, and you have match on, you can just click the handles here, and it will match them all to be Bezier. And now they're all easing in and easing out. And
when you do that, when you select multiple keys, the graph will use the first key you selected. The handles will show up for the first key, and when you move them, all the rest of the keys will get the same values.
Yep. Another thing, if you notice, the head is kind of detached from the body. Well, it is detached. There's no neck here, but I've put in some extra secondary motion on it, so it actually looks like it's almost escaping the the gravity of the torso, flies up, then falls down really quick at the end. So it gives a lot of sense of weight. But there's one more thing we can add. That's some squash and some stretch. And there's two ways you can do this. First, before I show you how it's done animating, usually when you scale something, for example, if I scale the torso here, it'll be scaling everything that is parent to it. If I put bone compensation on, it won't be doing that. Actually, now the torso isn't falling along, but I'll explain that in a bit. But what would happen is basically it would not create this bone up here actually gets a key, and you can see it over in the tree. They all get a value change because they're all compensating. While the torso is scaling down, they're scaling up. And you end up with a lot of keys if you do this. One thing where you can actually get around this in some cases is what I've done. Create this thing called torso singleton, and I placed the image on that instead of the torso bone. This means that I can actually scale this without scaling anything. Actually, let me take this off. I can scale this without scaling the head and the arm. I still want to scale the belt ends here, but it just enables me to work with less keys. And usually, when you're setting up an animation, you want to work with as few keys as possible because it just makes it easier. So I'm just going to add some squash and stretch. Oh, yeah. Okay, you had a question?
Can you change the pivot point of the scale, or the origin point from where it scales?
No, the scale point is always the center of the bone. But what you can do is, for example, if you wanted to change where this was scaled, you could go into setup pose, and you could move this. Of course, I need to take bone compensation on as well. You could move this down, and now if I scale it, it will actually change the origin of it.
Ah, great.
Another way, if and let's say if you actually wanted to have two origins, you also wanted to have one in the center, then you would create a bone in the center, and then another one in the bottom that is parented to that one, and then the image attached to the last bone you've added. So then you can actually scale both of them separately using different pivot points.
Great, that makes sense.
Okay, so
I think I should point out that every bone you have has a little bit of overhead when you're animating. When you go to draw it at runtime, it has to do more computations for each bone, and it has to have separate timelines to animate that bone. So you want to minimize the number of bones for your character, but if you need the bones for something useful like this, then by all means.
all right, I'm just going to get started on adding a bit of a squash and stretch here. So I know that the guy hits the floor here on the first frame. So I'm going to add some scale. I'm actually just going to leave the pivot where I moved it because it actually makes sense. So I added some scaling here. And then I want him to reach this point up here where it's scaled the other way around. So I'm going to stretch him up and hit key for that. And now you end up with something that gets a little more life to it. I mean, this is another thing that takes some tweaking. And maybe actually this one here, I don't want it to actually scale before it starts hitting the floor. So I'm going to move this just one frame. Actually, I'm going to move it 2 frames. And then change this scale here to be Bezier. So it doesn't happen before the end. Just going to do like this. So it will move. It won't scale very much in the start. And then in the end, it will scale a lot. So once I do this, as you can see, it doesn't really, it changes a little on the way down, but then once we hit here, boom, it scales a lot because it's picking up the speed, and it actually looks like the impact of hitting the ground is making it squash like that. So, but now this is offset from the center. I'm just going to show you a way you can actually get around that. So first thing I'll do is I'm just going to move this, leave this here actually. Take this frame here and move it to, let's see, just going to do a little math in my head here. Let's say we put it around, how many frames do we have? We have 8 frames and we have 12, so we put it here. Then what will happen now is when I reach this point, take it looping off for a sec. When I reach this point and it goes back to here, then I'll have to add this key at this position here. Well, what this does is I kind of lose the the graph that I've been doing. So instead of doing that, I'm just gonna get rid of this key here. And
Sorry, I don't understand what's going on.
I'll explain it in a second. So I moved it out of the loop, so it is actually framed a bit further out. And then I set another key for the bone here at the loop. This is basically just a small workflow trick. Set the scale here.
I see. So
So
you have your scale that it doesn't loop evenly with the rest of the animation. It actually wraps around, and so this is how you're wrapping it around.
Yes. And then I move them. Now I actually have something that will look similar if I turn looping back on here. So it's just a quick way of actually offsetting your animation. So, and I will be doing this for pretty much all the things. I'll be doing it for the head as well, but instead of doing it manually here, I'm just gonna take the final thing, and you can see how it actually squashes and stretches the head as well. Just gonna minimize the top sheet, and scale up a bit so you can see it. There we go.
If you press play and then mouse over the image in the tree, it'll draw a box around the image, I believe, and then you'll be able to see the image bounce, squash, and stretch.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it plays, but you can. I don't know if that plays back quick enough for you. Actually, let me just quickly tweak this, and then try and play it back at a different speed. So this is going to be super slow-mo. As you can see, this is one thing I didn't show yet, is that you can actually just drag a box around things, and then you can change the timing. And you can do, if you want it, you can do multiple boxes and drag them.
Hold Control to do multiple boxes.
Now if I play it back, it would be a lot slower, and you might actually be able to see it in real time there, or something close. Alright, let me just undo that. So yeah, this is one way of doing an animation. I mean, there are different workflows you can use for this. Some people, they like to work in, not in step mode, but I prefer to do it that way. Do the extreme poses first, then do the in-betweens, and then when I have something usually pretty rigid that I like, then I'll go in and actually tweak the animation. So I think it's time to ask if you guys want a small break, like 10 minutes or so.
I'm fine.
Yeah, I'm fine as well.
All right then. Well, then just gonna go into some more small things here. All right. So let's say you have an animation, or that you have an animation that you need to do some tweaking on the images so it actually fits the images. For example, the bands up here that I haven't finished the images on. If I wanted to make some images to make them flow in the wind, one way I could do that is use my animation as a template, and I can go up into main menu and I can export, and I can export the entire sequence, or I can just export a frame and then paint over that in Photoshop. Also, we have the export for JSON and binary here, and well, GIF, JPEGs, AVIs, and QuickTimes. And one thing I actually like to do is actually exporting the PNGs out. I know I showed this one earlier, this one here. This one I actually exported out to do the images for the feet where they're bending. So I needed to have a template so I could actually see what kind of tweaking I would have to do on the images to make it look like the foot was bending. So I exported out a couple of frames of the animation, paste them into Photoshop, and just change the image of the foot around a bit, and then exported that out as a new image. So that's one way you can use it. Of course, you can also just export an entire sequence if you don't want to use your bones and use in your engines. Also, another thing we have is you can actually import things here. So, for example, if I export the JSON here, let me just change that to see if that's correct. Make a new folder. So if I export the JSON here, I've now exported all the animations. I can go in and I can import the animation. And we just want to have the one called run. We're just going to call it run imported, and then we apply it to the speedy skeleton. So now I've actually imported the animation. So if you have a skeleton, the same skeleton, and you're working in 2 different projects, you can send animation from one skeleton to the other. Yeah, go ahead.
Just wondering, if you import an animation for a skeleton that doesn't match, does it work? Does it?
It will not work. Your bones have to have the same names.
Yeah.
And the same number of bones.
Yeah, but
it doesn't do any conversion or anything.
No, the positions of the bones don't need to be the exact same in the setup pose. But the names have to be the same, and the hierarchy has to be the same.
Okay.
So the import mechanism is also useful not just for passing animations and skeletons between spine projects, but if you have your data in some other format, in some other tool, maybe use Maya or something like that, or Blender, if you can get your data into the same format that Spine uses to export, which we have documented on our website, then you can import that into Spine and use Spine as a tool to manipulate the data.
All right. I think it's time to jump into Photoshop for a little. So just going to do that and show you how to actually cut out the images. And I have this this quick file that I've set up here. Just going to clear all this paper that I have here so I can actually do some drawing. So usually I work with a Wacom tablet, and I mean, I suggest anyone who wants to do any kind of art to get one of those, because it makes things a lot easier to work with. So usually when you cut out things and you want your, for example, if I wanted to take the head here, instead of going in and cutting it out to a separate file, what I like to do is use masks, and I'll just show you how I do this. I have the main color here, and I make a duplicate of that, and do that by just holding Alt and then dragging it up, and it makes a copy of it. I'm just going to rename this one to head. And then I create a mask, again holding down Alt, so everything is black. I'm going to hide this and hide all the different parts that don't need masks. So now if I paint in this mask, what will happen is it'll show what's going on beneath. If I change the color to white, and if I change it to black, it will go away. So I'm just going to quickly draw out the head here. And then now to export it as a head, I've created a small script for this. I'm just going to show you. So I have these actions created, and the script is linked to my action. So the action, what it does is it scales the image, and I usually work at around 2000 by 2000 pixels, and then I scale it down to 33%, and then it exports it, and it'll be using the name of the layer. So for example, I'm just going to rename it so I don't overwrite the ones I had. With the layer selected, I just hit F5, and now I have the image. I'm just gonna quickly find that image so I can actually see.
So if you add an image to the image folder, or you change an image in the image folder that Spine has loaded for your skeleton, it will immediately show the changes in Spine, so you can work side by side with your image editor and manipulate the images.
Yeah. Oh, actually, I think Wrong place. I'm not used to working at this this resolution here, so let me just see where I actually save this. Oh, there we go. Speedy new. So in here, I have this head new file here. Just gonna preview it, and now I have an image that only has the head, and it automatically trims it. And if you want to use the script, we'll also be making that available, so you can use that. And this is basically what I'll be doing. So once I have the first one here done, then make a new copy, call this one torso, create a new mask, hide the old one, and
Isn't it sort of hard to see where you're drawing when it's when you start and everything's not visible and then you have to draw?
I mean, I could just take this old one here and change the opacity of that, but usually when you've been working with the same image for a long time, then you kind of know where things are, and also it doesn't really matter if I actually painted out something I didn't I want to, I could just, you know, get rid of it again, because the benefit of working this way is it's non-destructive. You don't lose anything by cutting it out by using masks. Instead of going in and actually cutting out each individual piece, it would be destructive. It would be a very destructive workflow doing it that way, because if you wanted to go in and tweak something, then you'd be in trouble. Also, another thing that I like to do is go up here to the window and arrange in Photoshop and set a new window, because usually when I work, I like to have, I mean, I'm working at a pretty high resolution to see what's going on, but I also want to be able to preview the art at the correct size. So I'll be working at something like this, but then I can see a preview of the actual size that I'm going to be exporting it at. So yeah, let me just see if I've forgotten anything here.
So you use a mask because it's a non-destructive way to cut out the images. If you had a part of your character that overlapped, like if the head was closer to the torso, what would you have to do?
Well, usually, and this, then I would put them in a different layer, like I've done here with the hair, because the hair is overlapping. The hair is overlapping the head, and I know that I want those to be a separate image, so I put them in a different layer. Sometimes you might accidentally merge two layers, and then you'll just have to repaint some small parts of it. But this is definitely the easiest way to do it. I'll be doing the same, I mean, for the belt here. Then we have the hood ends, and as you see, they're not completely done yet, but they'll be behind. So it'll be pretty simple for me to actually go in and paint those out, and I don't need to have a mask for those because they're on their own separate layer. So yeah, we're getting pretty close to the end here. So if you have any questions, we'll kind of set off like 20 minutes or so for questions. So if you have any, just start asking.
None from me.
All right.
I think I got them all out during the presentation.
All right, cool.
Okay, I'm just getting started. On the other hand, so basically, I wanted to know: do you plan to add export options, like in your basic spine animation? Do you plan to have events that are not linked to bones? Like we call them triggers usually. Let's say when the foot hits the floor, you would have you could add in your animation a sort of trigger at that moment. So when you read it in a game engine, you would know to play the footstep sound, for instance. Do you have any plans on that line?
Yes, we do. One of the stretch goals was for an event timeline, and that's what that would be. Um, we it was pretty far down in the stretch goals, so there's a lot of stuff we'll do first. But we had some brief conversations about how we do it. Basically, there would be an events folder under the skeleton. So you'd go there and you would create a new event. So you'd call it, say, footstep or footstep sound. Then during the animation, you would scrub to the timeline position where you want the event, and you would press the key icon in the key column in the tree, similar to how you key slots for image changes. That would set a key for the footstep event at that timeline position. A row in the dope sheet would show up for that, for the footstep sound. And then in your game, you would just get a string that's the key for the event. And when it happens in the animation, you would have a hook to be able to take whatever action you want. You could spawn particles or play sounds or do whatever you'd like.
Awesome.
Yeah, one thing, and since we don't have that in yet, we can't show you the workflow for it. But basically, we want to keep everything consistent. For example, when we add a drawable key order, it will work the same way as when you're actually keying, which image you want to have shown. So it'll be working the same way. We're gonna be keeping things consistent all through, so it will be easy to get into the new features.
Yeah, for draw order, you would in animate mode you would reorder the slots, and then a little dot would appear where he has the mouse currently in the key column, just like for when you change the image for a slot, and then you would key the draw order, and it would show up in the dope sheet and change at that position.
Cool.
So in the meantime, we don't have keyable draw order, but you can use 2 slots. So say you had an animation where, you have a bone that is circling your character's head. So you could have one slot in front of the head and one slot behind the head. Then as the bone moves back and forth around the character's head, you would show the image in front, in the slot in front, and as it goes behind the head, you would hide it in front and show the image in the back slot as a workaround until we have keyable draw order.
Okay. Second question is, I've noticed in the documents you've shared before the presentation, just the kind of workflow or the backlog that you have for what you have planned for the software. You just have an item called Texture Packer. I was wondering if you plan to actually make texture packing plugin for Spine, or you just want to make a sort of plugin for the software that's called Texture Packer?
No, the texture packing in Spine will be the texture packer from libgdx.
Okay.
It'll be integrated into Spine. It'll be Spine's own texture packer. And the way it works is Spine currently doesn't really, it works on individual images. So you have a directory full of individual images, you attach them to your bones and you animate. When you export the animation data, it just uses the name. It's actually the path relative to what you set for the image folder. That's just a key in the data, it's just a string. So at runtime, you can do anything you want to look up or draw. You could render an SVG, or you can look up a region in the texture atlas, or you could load an individual file using that string. So Spine doesn't need texture packing itself. You need the texture packing at runtime in whatever game toolkit you use. So putting the texture packer in Spine would just be a convenience for users to not have to buy another tool to do the texture packing. And it's also a little bit more integrated into the workflow. When you save out the animation data, you can also have it pack all your textures in one step, so you can more quickly use it in your game.
Okay. Just have 2 small questions to finish up with. First of all, do you have any plans to separate I call them mount points, but for instance, for the hair and the hood ends, you know, they're still bones. I understand that's how it works. Like in Blender, whenever you animate anything and you export it to a game engine, everything's a bone. Do you plan to keep that structure, or do you plan to really separate bones and basically bones of zero length into a new sort of entity?
No, I think bones. Well, right. So the bones with the zero length are really just bones, same as any bone. Um,
Hmm.
eh, I think one of the things that might be relevant to your question is for deformation. What we would do for that is allow you to move the vertices of the images and key them all. So once you're doing that, you can have an image that's attached to a bone. We call it an attachment offset, which you currently define in setup mode, and that attachment offset cannot change in animations. So
Okay.
the image is positioned relative to the bone. You know, that's the same in animate mode. So to move an image to a different point, you can't move it to a different point relative to the bone. You would have to create a new bone, and then you'd be able to move that image wherever you like. So if we had deformation, then you'd be able to move all the vertices of an image relative to the bone during an animation. Um, Normally to deform the image, but if you move them all the same amount, then you'd be able to move the attachment point
Yeah,
for the
I
image
was just
essentially.
wondering if you wanted to keep the way it's working right now, or add a new sort of entity just for the user readability, basically. It's that was my question. It's fairly simple.
Oh,
I make it sound
okay.
simple.
So yeah, I think it's more clear that you're animating with bones. I don't think we'd want to hide that. Bones have some overhead. You know, there's matrix multiplications that happen for each bone, so you don't want to have just tons of bones. And also with the slot system that we're using, it's really tied to the bone. So all the images in slots for a bone, they get manipulated based on what happens to the bone. So spine is very bone centric, and I think it's probably an approach we'll stay with.
Perfect. Uh, Really, my last question. Do you have any plans to add more complex inverse kinematics, like having a parent bone be able to automatically modify its children bone by a certain amount? Uh, Stuff like that, stuff that you'd find in a 3D animation package.
Well, actually,
We yeah. Do you mean at runtime or for posing the skeleton?
Basically, just in spine directly.
yeah, that's actually one thing I didn't show. So I'll just quickly do that. That's actually a good thing that I'm just gonna save this as a new project. There we go. Let's see. I'm gonna show you this. So when you're in setup mode, you can use this pose tool down here, and I'm just gonna create a couple of bones. So
You can use it in animation mode as well.
yeah, well, but not for animation per se. So with the pose tool active, I can select these two bones, and a small divot will appear out here, and now I can actually move things around using IK.
Oh, okay,
This
cool.
this works for even more bones, so I can add like as many as I want. Really, I've tested this out with like 300 bones. It becomes a little more difficult to control, of course. Usually, when you do IK, you usually just stick with 2 bones. So, but yeah, we
Oh,
do we
that's
do.
very cool to know.
So the good thing.
It, it's sort of a hidden feature because you have to select multiple bones. You could even select bones that are not connected. It doesn't care. Like if you selected the first and the last bone, you could still. Um, hmm? That's strange.
Oh well.
That's a bug. We're not supposed to show bugs. Oh, well,
I
yeah.
won't
So
tell nobody.
unfortunately, this is being recorded. Yeah, you have to select multiple bones with the pose tool, so it isn't always obvious that IK is there. But we do have IK for posing the skeleton. We don't have IK for runtime, so you can't use IK to avoid having to set keys. IKs can be very useful at runtime to do things like have a character crouch on an uneven surface and have the feet be positioned on the surface, and then have the parent bones positioned correctly, like the knees would bend and everything to keep your character from looking strange. That's quite complicated and affects all the runtimes, but so we don't have that. We just have posing.
Yeah, just to have it as a tool to be able to model with is really awesome already. So cool. That was all my questions.
All right. There's just one thing that I didn't show, and I just wanted to do now. So this animation here. One thing you can do. Let's say I wanted to make this guy look a little different. So I could do this, and it would actually, because I've changed the setup pose, it actually goes through the to the animate mode here. So, and the same thing if I wanted him to look very strange when he's running. See, just by doing a couple of changes in the setup pose, you can actually get some variation in your animations that would be hard to get otherwise. So that's another way of using it. And also, I didn't show the axes down here, the local, parent, and global. And global is what I use most of the time, really. But sometimes you want to be able to move something along its local axes. So now I'm moving this bone on the local axis. And let's say I wanted to move this head along the axis of its parent. I'll select the bone and set it to parent. Now when I move it, I'll be moving along the parent position.
That is cool.
So now he looks really goofy now when he runs.
Yeah. So the way to sum that up is to say that the animations are applied relative to the bind pose. So the bind pose can be manipulated, and all of the animations will just be applied to that. And that actually happens at runtime. So if you wanted your character to look up at runtime, an easy way to do that, to have him look up during all of his animations, no matter what they are, is to programmatically manipulate the bind pose to have him look up or look towards the mouse position.
Now he looks like his. Yeah, sorry, just go ahead.
Okay, sorry. From what I've seen in the JSON file, your bind pose is basically whatever is at frame 0, I guess.
No, the bind pose is what you define in the setup mode. We call it the setup pose or the bind pose.
Okay, but I mean when you export it to a file.
Oh, right. Let me just open up one of the example JSON files. So yes, the bind pose is what's defined in the bones section. The bind pose is really, it's defined in both the bones and the slot section. So the bones are the actual bind pose positioning, and the slots, they can have an optional color and attachment, and that's the bind pose color and attachment.
Okay.
And then the animation data is all relative to the bind pose. So it needs to be combined at runtime.
Cool. That was clear.
Good. Cool. I guess another thing we can show is the bone length tool, which is sort of hidden.
If you have one of the transform tools active and you have a bone selected, you move to the tip of it and get this thing here that you can use to scale the bone. And see, if I move it all the way down, it turns into what I usually refer to as a null.
The zero length bone.
Yep.
So There's also some other little things that are not so apparent. With the rotate tool, you can hold shift, and that will move at increments of 15 degrees, I think, which can be useful if you wanted to get like a 45-degree angle without typing it in.
Yeah.
There's also the text boxes in the main toolbar. You can click and drag them up and down to change them.
Or use the mouse wheel.
Yeah, you can also mouse wheel. Mouse wheel does a smaller increment, so you can mouse wheel to get a very fine, to change it a small amount. Just a shortcut for typing in values or clicking and dragging.
And another thing is rotation is additive. And this is one of the things that I find really useful if you have longer chains, is if I have these bones here selected and rotation, then I can rotate them. They rotate additively. So this is really handy. And if I, for example, if I were to go in and set bone composition on and rotate, then suddenly you can now rotate them separately. They won't follow their parent around. That just means if you use that in animation, you would actually need to key the you'd actually need to key the transform as well. So, for example, if I go into animate mode here and set a key here on the first frame and a key here, then it looks as it should. If I then set a key here with bone composition on, as you can see, translate also turns orange here, which means there's a key for that. So, but I also need to set the key for that at the previous frame. So, just gonna move that. There we go. So now you can actually explode your skeleton like that.
Yeah, you can make special effects with that. It's pretty cool.
Yep.
We could show the name tags.
Oh yeah. We have name tags down here, both for images and bones, and you can actually use those to select what you want.
You can actually click on the name tag text itself. In a complex skeleton, there's usually many more names. Sometimes it can be difficult, especially when bones are on top of each other, to select the correct bone, and the name tags are convenient for that.
So like here, lot of the bones, really small. If I zoom in, you'll be able to see. If I zoom out, the name tags will actually spread out, so you can select what's going on.
Trying to think of other little tricks. I tend to double click to select. Soren likes to press spacebar, but I like to double click.
Yeah, to deselect. I like spacebar. That's what I'm.
Let's see. On Windows, if you right-click the X button in the upper right, careful you don't left-click it. That'll close the application. If you right-click it once, it will the window will be always on top of other windows.
Oh, cool.
And if you right-click it again, then it will turn that off. We should really add some visual indicator that that's on, but that can be convenient for putting spine on top of, say, Photoshop in a corner, and then changing images and having them update automatically in spine. You could show the scroll to button in the tree.
So now it's off, and selected a bone here, but it didn't actually select it in the tree. So if I turn it on, it'll actually go to it.
It selected it in the tree, I think, but it didn't expand to it.
It didn't focus on the selection. So I'm just gonna take this down again, turn it off, and I'll select the bone here, and then it will go to it. the reason we put this in is if you have really large chains, you might end up with a lot of scrolling up and down. So it's nice to have that up there, to so you don't end up with a huge tree hierarchy in no time, because you'll be selecting all the bones. Sometimes you just want to keep it small. For the ninja character, which didn't have that many bones in it, it's not a big issue. But if you have a lot of bones, then sometimes you don't want everything to just expand automatically.
What's the average bone count that you determined was like, you know, in the area where people would most use it?
I think it really depends on what character, what sort of things you're building with Spine.
Yeah,
It doesn't have to just be characters.
it really depends. For example, the Spine Boy character, it has bones for the upper leg and the lower leg, for both legs, and upper arm and lower arm. So that's already 8 more bones there, and also has the neck. It really depends. So it's hard to say. I mean, some bones, some things don't need that many bones. For example, the Power Up project here, it has a few bones, but that's
A bunch of bones.
yeah, that's another thing. You can actually hide the bones, but you can still select them by just hovering over them. So if you know where they are, and that's
Usually,
yeah,
yeah.
it's something when you set it up, you'll know where you have your bones. You just hover over it and they pop up. So,
And this particular animation uses, or skeleton uses, a lot of null bones, zero length bones. So this isn't a great example. Usually it's easier to mouse over the bones because they're larger. Maybe the dragon,
yeah.
like the dragon. Yeah, this is a lot easier to select your bones. And you can manipulate the bones even though they're hidden. Once you select them, you're good. You can also draw a box to select if you have no selection. Yeah.
So yeah, you can still select them. You won't see the labels though, unless you set them to visible.
There's in the tree, there's 3 buttons. Well, first there's collapse and expand. So if nothing is selected in the tree and you hit expand, it expands everything. Same with collapse. But if you select just one single node in the tree, it'll only expand or collapse that node and below. So you can collapse just a portion of the tree and all of its children, or expand just a portion of the tree if you like. And also the filter buttons in the tree, in the upper left part of the tree. If you're manipulating bones a lot and you don't need to look at, the 100 images that you have attached, it can really save you a lot of scrolling up and down to be able to hide all the slots and images. Or if you're working with just images or just slots, then it's easier that way.
Yeah, for this animation here, I'd like to point out that the guy who made this he'd only been using Spine for a couple of days, so we were kind of blown away when we saw this animation. It was really impressive for us, and also, I mean, one thing that definitely motivates us to improve on Spine.
Yeah, he's really good at art, and he's a really good animator, and he picked it up quickly. So if you have repeat on and you're scrubbing the timeline, if you start your scrub inside the timeline and you go past the end, then the timeline position will wrap to the beginning automatically, and that just sort of helps you visualize the animation. If you start your scrub outside of the last key, then it won't do that. So if you wanted to move the timeline position, you could either just click past the end of the animation or turn off repeat. There's also a little tiny button underneath repeat for framing. It scales the timeline so that it fits in the window. You can also mouse wheel if you're over the timeline, and that will change. It will zoom the timeline to the mouse position. So if you want to zoom in or out quickly with the mouse wheel, you can do that.
And you can right click and drag the timeline as well.
Yeah, that's really important. Oh, you could show how you set the loop start and end.
Yep.
Also the current position. For a very long animation, it's useful. So you click, you choose a timeline position and then click loop start, choose another position and loop end. And then when you play with the loop on, it will repeat only that section. That could be useful for tweaking a particular section. If you have the timeline zoomed in a whole lot, this animation is very short. It's only 30 frames. If you have a much longer animation, then if current is checked and you have repeat off and you hit play, you could just do it with this one. Just turn off repeat.
Oh.
Hit current. Yeah, hit current and then hit play. And you'll see that the timeline will automatically scroll to keep the current position centered.
Yeah, I can show it on the Spinosaurus example because it has
Oh yeah.
a lot more frames. Yep, has a lot more frames.
When the timeline has lots of keys in it, a scroll bar will appear. And you can click and drag that to jump to different parts of the timeline. Yeah, I think that's a lot of the little hidden features that you might not encounter. Well, we'll be writing proper documentation. It's just we have lots of things to do, and everyone wants everything done at once. So we're doing our best.
Yeah, you had a question?
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about the support for animation blending?
Sure. So the way that works is at runtime, you have an animation object, and you can apply that to a skeleton. You have an animation object specifically for a skeleton, and it poses that skeleton at a time that you give. So, and that time that you give is similar to a timeline position. So you need to keep track of the state of your character. So if your character has been in an animation a certain amount of time, you need to pass that time to the animation, and it will pose your skeleton. That's how you would do, straight, not mixed animation. If you wanted to mix your animation, then you pose your skeleton with the first animation, and then you mix that pose with another animation. So for example, if you want your guy to walk and then jump, first you would pose him for wherever he would be walking. Then you would mix it with the jump animation, and you provide an alpha value from between 0 and 1, and that's how much blending would happen. So typically, you would have the blending, you would track the blending similar to how you track the state. So you know that you're mixing these two animations for a certain amount of time, and you want the blending to change from 0 to 1 over that amount of time. And that will mean that he's walking. Then you start blending at 0, so it's just walking. Then as you go from 0 to 1 with the blending, it blends more and more towards the jumping for a short amount of time. And then the jumping would take over, and you would only be jumping until you went to land. So there's some complicated state management there. It's not really that complicated. It's just, now I'm walking, now I'm blending from walking to jumping, now I'm jumping. You manage that, and you just apply your first animation and then mix it with your second animation. There's an example of that. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, that covers the sort of like transitioning from one animation to another smoothly. But is there something for essentially running two animations in parallel with each other, and you're not trying to transition from one to another? Something like running in one direction and the character turns their head to look at, or moves their head up and down to look at something interesting. Not controlled by mouse, but just as they run by an interesting object. So you want them to be looking down while also running. So you're not transitioning to the head look, but running both animations in parallel.
Right. So, but there's a couple ways you can do that. You have access to all the bones, so you could apply your running animation and then programmatically set the rotation on, say, the head bone, so that he's looking at whatever's interesting. That might be what you want in some cases. In other cases, you're going to want his head to animate. You don't want it to just point at the thing, but you want it to smoothly move towards something. And in that case, you would essentially do the same thing as transitioning from running to jumping. But your second animation, you would programmatically generate that. So you'd have an animation that says, he's going to rotate until he's looking at this position. And then you keep track of how much time has passed, and you mix the two. So he's running, and then you're mixing that with his head turning.
Yeah, one thing we talked about a while back was to have animation layers so you could actually blend between them by setting a weight for them and have them blend on top of each other. But it's not something that we've added as a goal yet, but it's something that might make it in the future.
All right, I think I understand. Just for another example, so I can wrap my head around it a bit more. This is an example from Artisan, so it's one that I know a little bit better. We have a bow and arrow craft, and we want to let the player start charging up the bow and arrow and be able to charge it back up, which is to pull the string back while they're standing, running, jumping. And we can't do that currently because we can only play singular animations at a time. So the support we need for that is, the upper body arms are pulling a bow and arrow back, and you can be doing that while you're idling or while you're running or while you're jumping by blending the pulling of the arrow back with those other animations.
So say your guy is idling. If you're animating the arms moving around while he's idling, it's not a great example, but say you were, what would you want the arms to do if you were blending it with the bow and arrow animation? I think what you'd want is to not animate the arms and only apply the arm animation for the bow and arrow. Is that right?
I think so. I mean, yeah, you can sort of imagine there's a bow and arrow charging idle, which is just standing and pulling the bow and arrow back. But wanting to mix that with a running animation, I'm not sure how we would do that.
Yeah.
Without some sort of blending.
I think I know what you mean. You basically want to have an animation that only affects the arms, where he's pulling back the bowstring, and then another animation where he's either walking or idle or something like that, to be played on top of that. So you have two animations playing at the same time with the same skeleton.
Yeah. To do that, you would apply first your running animation, and then your second animation, you would apply it on top of it. And it would only change the bones that it has keys for. So if your second animation was the animation to pull back and hold the bow, then when you're running, the arms would only be set to where the bow animation is set to. It might not look smooth because say the running has large arm movements. So if you're mixing the running animation with your bow animation, the large arm movements from the running is going to make your bow animation look messed up. So I think you really want to override any of the bone positions from the first animation with the second one. And to do that in the API, you would just apply the second one instead of mixing it.
Yeah, or you could do an in-between animation, so the blend would be smoother. So you have him running with the arms swinging, and then you'd have him running. You just basically duplicate the run animation, give it a different name, and then don't have his arms moving in that animation. Then you could blend the two really smoothly.
Gotcha. Great.
There was a guy in the Corona forums. Let me find the link. And he's relatively new to game development. And in a few days, he integrated Spine with his game, and he did some mixing, which is pretty neat. He did, what he did actually was he programmatically generates animations based on, I think, where you're touching, so that his guy will rotate to that, like the guy's head and the weapon moves and points to where you're touching. And it doesn't just instantly point there, but it actually animates to that position. So that's pretty neat. Almost found the link. Found the user trying to find his pose.
While you find that, I just opened the Spine Boy example. As you can see, the jump animation, it just jumps up in the air, but it's actually animated for him to move horizontally. So, for example, let me just see how many frames I actually have here. Quite a lot. So here, I would move him. Oh, I actually have bone compensation on. Let me turn that off.
That will happen to you quite often.
So, like there. And then, key this here. So yeah, this is just really, I mean, this is not tweaked very well. But basically, that's what you would be doing programmatically. Actually, setting your
moving the root
bone instead of doing it in the animation. And you can always, while you're animating, you can always do the animation on the root. Just make sure that you get rid of the keys afterwards.
Yeah, there's been a couple of forum users that have done that. If you key your root bone, it makes it a little confusing at runtime why you can't position the root bone. Because when you apply the animation, it positions your character, and then you have to set the root bone after you apply the animation. So I pasted the link into the chat for the guy's game. Skip to around the middle to see him moving around and aiming, but it was interesting that someone new to game development could relatively easily put animations in their game and even generate the animations at runtime.
Yeah, well, I think we're gonna wrap up the recording at least. If you have any more questions before we do that, then now's the time. But I think we've covered everything so far.
Yeah, thanks so much. This has been great.
Cool.
Yeah, you've been pretty thorough, so.
That's great. That's great. Happy to help. Well, I'm gonna stop the recording here.